So basically, he removed his own eyeballs because he thought it's better that I do it myself rather than the prisoners do it. So he was locked in the segregation unit at the time. Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. Sohom. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You're about to watch a clip of me being a guest on my boy Shaun Attwood's YouTube channel. Quick shout out to Shaun. And when I was a guest, I discussed a number of cases. Some of these were like high profile cases, many of which I'm sure you've heard of if you're a true crime fan. And I also talked about my own cases, so patients that I've personally assessed, acting as an expert witness for criminal court. I anonymise my patients, always change their names, demographic details, out of respect for not just the patients, but more importantly, the victims and their families. So sit back, relax. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll catch you after the clip. So this guy Rex, he developed this belief that other prisoners wanted to eat his eyeballs because they thought that they would gain superpowers if they ate his eyeballs, and they would break out of prison, so they'd smash through these walls. So we had this like really complicated, detailed, delusional belief in his head of what's going to happen.
Imagine if he ended up in the same cell as the Brain Eater.
Yeah, could have.
Bit of
nice bit
synergy,
collaboration.
Synergy.
Could have done a collab.
Could have ended up with Superman. Well, not quite Superman.
So basically, he removed his own eyeballs because he thought it's better that I do it myself rather than the prisoners do it. So he was locked in the segregation unit at the time. So I'll just quickly tell you the bit before. So he had self-harmed minimally in the week before. So he'd banged his head against the wall. He'd told a couple of nurses that he felt that people were coming into his room in the middle of the night and like assaulting him in the middle of the night, which obviously is not true because he's in a locked prison cell. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think there were signs that he was deteriorating. But to answer your question, he was in segregation, and similar to Pamela, he had like a plastic knife. So he used the edge of that to take out one eyeball, and then the plastic knife snapped. So he had to use his fingers to take out the other one.
And scoop it out.
Yeah.
Gruesome.
Yeah. And meanwhile, while this was happening, one of the prison officers saw it, called like their colleagues, but they didn't want to go into the cell because at the beginning he was armed and because he was obviously really, really, really agitated. So they called up for people with backup with all the, the riot gear. But by the time they came, like the whole thing only lasted like 3 or 4 minutes. That's how long it took him. But by the time they came, he'd already sort of done the deed.
They teach you how to do it in karate. Bird beak strike, it's called.
Sorry.
Just seriously, bird beak strike.
Don't know where I find him.
I think your eyes are quite soft. I don't think it takes that much.
There's an optic nerve. It just dangles out on an optic nerve.
Yeah.
It must take a hell of a lot to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to be pretty unwell, I think. Yeah. But so when I assessed him, this was like 2 years after the event, and he was in a care home because he was blind and he was wearing shades the entire time. But his solicitors were arguing that the mental health team didn't protect his safety because they didn't do a proper assessment, number one, and that the prison officers didn't come in to stop him quick enough, number two. And I actually have to say that even though the outcome was pretty horrendous, I don't think it could have been predicted because his self-harm before it escalated so quickly. There was no signs that he was going to do what he did. And even though he expressed some paranoia, he didn't tell anybody about his specific delusion that they're trying to eat my eyeballs. If he said that, it would have been a different scenario.
Could have been prevented. Yeah.
See, in America, if you call someone that, you say they got those charges, you have to produce the paperwork on that person to prove it. And then if you can't prove it, you get it. So that would have been avoided. But sometimes they just run wild and say things and people believe it. And that's because I can't imagine the stress he must have been under to not have those charges, but to be, the whole population think you do. Yeah. You're just a dead man walking.
What really stood out for me about Rex, he just wasn't built for prison. Like, I know you spent time in prisons, I've worked there. There's a certain way that people carry themselves, and he was just like a timid, kind of slightly older, placid sort of man. And I think they just saw him as easy prey.
They probably thought he fit the profile of someone who'd done that.
Yeah,
absolutely. I can see that happening.
Because instead of being a hardened criminal, he was like a bit of a
no swagger,
awkward, no swagger.
Yeah.
So how does mental illness lead to violence?
Well, so there's lots of different mechanisms. There is the way that symptoms directly can cause aggression. So we've talked about some of those in the patients we've discussed today already. So people can hear voices, for example, command hallucinations telling you to attack somebody. People can have paranoid delusions when they're psychotic, where they believe that other people are out to hurt them, so they attack them preemptively. So that's the most direct kind of link, I would say. And then you get indirect links. So we mentioned before that most of my patients have some sort of horrific life experience or vicissitudes. So from poverty, homelessness, physical or sexual abuse, drug and alcohol use, all of those factors lead to criminality, and separately they all lead to mental illnesses. So in the cohort that I see, which is a bit of both, then so they have factors that lead to both of those things. So it's like an indirect cause. And then lastly, I would say that some people who are mentally ill get exploited. So it's probably a small proportion of my patients, maybe 5 to 10%. But I've certainly assessed some people who have something like a learning disability or schizophrenia, who are completely marginalized and isolated, and criminal gangs prey on them. So I've assessed several cases where drug dealing gangs have befriended somebody who's just a little bit odd, socially awkward, got a mental illness, and they pretend that they're part of the gang, and they pretend to be pally with them, spend some time with them, but they actually just use them. They manipulate them to like sell drugs on their behalf, so they take all the risk, but the criminal gang take all the benefits, the money.
Of course. Sorry, I'm being greedy.
How do you handle violence in secure units?
So in secure units, the first thing I'd say is that violence isn't common. It isn't very common. So it's not like every single day there's a violent incident, but certainly every couple of weeks in the secure units that I've worked in. As you know, I worked in Broadmoor for a short period of time, but most of my work has been in medium secure units. And the way that we handle it, first of all, we have to form a trusting relationship with the patients themselves. So if they are willing to open up to us about their backgrounds and different aspects of their life, they're less likely to be angry towards us. Secondly, we have to kind of know their trigger points. So you have to know the patients intimately. If somebody's really quiet and shy, if their behavior changes, so if they suddenly seem agitated, then that's a trigger warning. Or the opposite, if they're usually quite friendly and gregarious and out on the ward and they're becoming isolated. So you've got to be almost psychic to kind of recognize the warning signs before anything escalates. And then when you actually do have violence on the wards, all the nurses and all the staff carry around these alarms. So you have to scan your thumbprint to get one in the gate, and you're not allowed into the unit unless you've got an alarm on you. So if you pull the alarm, then it alerts all the other nurses in the hospital to where an incident's happening. So they run over and try and intervene. But also we've got seclusion rooms. So that's kind of the equivalent of the antiquated idea of a padded cell. It's not actually padded, but it's like a room where there's almost nothing in there. There's just a mattress, sometimes like a blanket, but it's like an anti-rip blanket, so you can't make ligatures. And you house people in seclusions for the shortest amount of time possible. So it's not supposed to be a punishment. It's supposed to be when they're so unsafe to be on the ward that you nurse them temporarily, usually about a day, maybe 3 or 4 days maximum, generally, when they're kept like in an isolated room. And the doctors and nurses come in every few hours, give them medication, give them food, obviously. So you kind of separate them from the ward for the minimum amount of time possible to try and calm them down. Then you have to release them back onto the ward. Yeah.
In America, you get tased, cuffed here, cuffed there, cuffed everywhere, leg cuffs, and then you get 4-pointed or 5-pointed, which means you're on a slab of a bunk, and if they're just going to 4-point you, they just chain you down naked, 1, 2, 3, 4. But if they 5-point you, they're going to chain your head down and maybe even put a spit hood on you as well.
But how is that helping the situation?
And leave you there for days, and you're just pissing and shitting where you lay.
Jeez.
Yeah, how is that helping the situation?
That's the American. That's the Sheriff Joe Arpaio approach.
Wow.
No, that is extreme cruelty.
I spoke to people who 4-pointed and 5-pointed. That's how I know.
Did you ever see it happening?
No, because they take them away once they act up, and then it happens to them in they put them in max security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the prisoners must obviously put up a fight to try and resist that happening to them.
Well, yeah, they've probably done something violent, and then the guards just come in and tase them and crush them down and take them away.
Yeah.
4.5 point them.
I think the British approach is very different to the American approach. I'm not saying there's no brutality. I think there is, and we talked about the case of Rocky Bennett, who was killed during a restraint. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think the ethos is to try and be humane, try and rehabilitate, try and treat. Whereas in America, it just sounds brutal, isn't it?
One of my mates who got 4-point and 5-point, he managed to sneak a razor blade in his mouth, though. And use that to do something. I can't remember. It's crazy situations.
So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find that all interesting. If you're interested in true crime and mental illness, or the crossover between the two, then you have to check out the other videos on my channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. I cover a whole range, a smorgasbord of cases and topics, similar to what I did on Shaun's channel, but a few different ones. Again, you've probably heard of some of them. And I also talk about more general issues. So I talk about individual diagnoses, I talk about working with psychopaths, I talk about mental illness and gangs, I talk about, what else? Oh yeah, polygraphs, lie detectors, how to beat one. I talk about nature versus nurture when it comes to murdering and violence. I talk about the psychoanalysis of stalking, I talk about domestic violence. What I'm trying to say is that there's something for everybody on my channel. Go check it out, go subscribe, and hit me up in the comments section. Enjoy. Oh, and also I've almost forgot myself to say, please do not forget, I love you.